The first sound that split the quiet of my street that day wasn't birds or kids playing or a lawn mower humming in the distance. It was a crash. The kind of crash that rattles windows and sends dogs barking in a panic. Metal twisting, wood splintering. A sound that didn't belong in our neighborhood, yet echoed down the cul-de-sac like a thunderclap. I remember dropping my coffee mug onto the porch rail, hot liquid splattering against my hand as I bolted toward the front yard. And there it was. Karen's prized black Range Rover nose buried into my fence. Smoke hissed from the hood, curling upward like some wounded beast. The bumper dangled, loose and pathetic, scraping the asphalt. For once my fence was still standing. She was. Karen stumbled out, clutching the door for balance, her designer sunglasses askew, disbelief etched across her face. She wasn't used to losing battles, and she sure as hell wasn't used to losing them in public. Neighbors peeked from their porches, some gasping, others whispering, and I swear I even heard laughter carried on the evening breeze. Because for weeks, Karen had treated my property like her personal shortcut, plowing through the same section of fence over and over, daring me to stop her. And every time I rebuilt it, she mocked me. Every time I filed a complaint, she buried it. But this time the fence had fought back. Want to know how one quiet, ordinary homeowner turned a simple white fence into the trap that wrecked the HOA Queen's SUV? Well, to understand, you have to go back. Back to when I first moved into that neighborhood and thought I'd found my slice of the American dream. It was picture perfect at first. Quiet streets where kids pedaled their bikes without fear. Neighbors who nodded politely from across their lawns. Houses that looked like they'd been lifted straight from a glossy postcard, trimmed hedges, neat mailboxes, American flags fluttering in the breeze. My place wasn't the biggest, wasn't the flashiest, but I was proud of it, especially the fence. Now people laugh when I say that, but you have to understand, that fence wasn't just wood hammered into dirt. It was late nights after work, a hammer in one hand and a cold beer in the other. It was measuring, sawing, sweating under the fatting sun. It was me, stubborn and tired, but determined to build something with my own two hands. Sturdy pine, crisp white paint that caught the evening light just right. To me, it was more than a boundary. It was a frame for the life I wanted. My yard. My space, my peace. For a while, it gave me exactly that. Peace. I'd sit on the porch as the sun went down, my dog Max stretching out near the gate, his ears flicking lazily at the sounds of crickets. The air would cool, and for those moments I felt settled. Content, like I'd carved out a little corner of the world that was mine. But peace never lasts long where people like Karen live. She was in her late 50s, though she carried herself like royalty. Expensive sunglasses, sharp manicured nails, lips curled into a permanent sneer. And that Range Rover, it wasn't just a car to her. It was a throne on wheels, a moving proclamation that she was above the rest of us. And of course, she wasn't just a neighbor. She was on the HOA board. Worse, she was the kind of board member who carried herself like a queen. Rules didn't apply to her. They were weapons she wielded against others. At first, I ignored her. Let her post her little notes on the bulletin board about mailbox symmetry or trash cans pulled out too early. Let her whisper with her clique at meetings. Fine. If she needed the illusion of power, she could have it. But then she turned her sights on me. I'll never forget the first time I saw the tire tracks. It was early morning, Max barking like mad at the back gate. I stepped out, mug in hand, only to see the fence leaning awkwardly, boards splintered. At first I thought maybe a storm, but the sky had been clear. Then I saw it, deep grooves in the grass, cutting straight through my yard. I didn't have to guess, I already knew. Later that same day, there she was, Karen, smug as ever, backing her Range Rover out of the driveway. Instead of turning onto the street like a normal human being, she cut straight across my lawn, through the gap she'd smashed in the fence. Her car bounced, dirt spitting from the tires, and she lifted her hand in a mock-sweet wave. That kind of wave that says, "What are you going to do about it?" My jaw clenched so tight, I thought my teeth might crack. Anyone decent would have apologized, maybe even offered to fix what they broke. But not Karen. No, she doubled down. At the next HOA meeting, she stood before the board, chin high, and declared, "We need to address unsightly fences in disrepair. They drag down property values." Then, in front of everyone, she turned her gaze on me. I sat there, heat burning in my chest, every neighbor's eyes shifting toward me like I was the one who'd failed the community, the one who was letting the place go. That was the moment something inside me shifted. It wasn't just about broken boards anymore. It wasn't about money or paint. It was about dignity. My fence wasn't just wood. It was proof of my effort, my ownership, my home. And she'd made a mockery of it and of me. And that's when I realized Karen had just declared war. You ever notice how arrogance has a rhythm? It doesn't just strike once, it repeats. Over and over like a bad song you can't escape. That's what it was like with Karen. The first time her SUV tore through my fence, I told myself maybe it was a mistake. Maybe she clipped it pulling out, misjudged the turn. Maybe she was late for her yoga class and decided shaving 30 seconds off her commute was worth it. But when I spent an entire Saturday repairing the damage, hammering nails, brushing on fresh paint, wiping sweat into my shirt, only to watch her plow through again a week later, laughing into her Bluetooth headset as if my property was her racetrack, I knew. This wasn't a mistake. This was a game to her. It became a habit. Twice a week, sometimes more, I'd wake to the sound of Max barking. I'd walk out with coffee in hand, only to see fresh tire marks in the grass, boards scattered like toothpicks, my fence lying in pieces. And always, always her smug little wave afterward. At first, I tried to reason with her. One morning, I caught her unloading groceries from the back of her SUV. My voice was calm, my hands steady, though inside I was shaking with frustration. "Karen," I said, "you've been driving through my fence. I need you to stop." She didn't even blink. "Oh, please, Mark, it's barely a fence. Just a few boards nailed together. Honestly, it looks like a public pathway. If you wanted privacy, you should build something sturdier." Her tone dripped with condescension, like I was a child who just didn't understand the rules of grown-up life. She adjusted her sunglasses, flashed me a fake smile, and added, "Besides, you should be thanking me. I'm adding character to your property." Character? That word stuck in my head long after she disappeared into her house. Character? No, what she was adding was chaos. So I did the reasonable thing. I went to the HOA. I filed complaints with photos, dates, even a video I'd managed to capture of her SUV bulldozing through my fence like a wrecking ball. I sat at the board meeting, folder in hand, waiting for justice. Waiting for someone in authority to say what we were all thinking. This woman is out of control. Instead, the president cleared his throat, shuffled through my papers, and said, "We appreciate you bringing this to our attention. However, property line disputes fall into a bit of a gray area." A gray area? My fence, my land, my property, wrecked over and over by one of their own board members. Before I could even argue, Karen leaned forward with that fake look of concern she wore so well. "Mark, maybe the problem isn't me. Maybe the problem is your fence. It just doesn't look very HOA friendly. Perhaps if you built something more in line with community standards, it wouldn't be so easy to damage." And the board nodded, sheep jotting notes like her words were gospel. By the end of the meeting, instead of Karen being reprimanded, I walked out with a violation notice, $200 fine for a damaged fence visible to the public. That night, I sat on my porch staring at the wreckage, Max pressed against my leg, his whine cutting through the silence. Neighbors walked by, glancing at the broken boards, then at me, their faces full of pity. Or worse, amusement. I even overheard one guy at the mailbox mutter, "At this point, Mark should just install a drive-through sign." It stung, not just the money, not just the humiliation. It was the disrespect. The way Karen strutted around the neighborhood like a peacock, wagging her finger at others for leaving trash cans out, scolding kids for riding bikes while treating my yard like her personal driveway. The more she mocked me, the bolder she became. One Saturday afternoon, I was barbecuing with friends in the backyard, burgers sizzling on the grill, laughter filling the air. That's when her Range Rover came barreling through, wood splintering, smoke trailing behind. She waved at us as if she were the guest of honor at her own twisted parade. My buddies stood there slack-jawed, spatulas in hand, while she revved the engine and sped off down the street. Another time, she slowed down right after smashing through, rolled down her window and shouted, "Might want to fix that. HOA doesn't like eyesores." Then she sped off, her laughter echoing like nails on a chalkboard. It was humiliation on repeat. Every broken board wasn't just damage. It was an insult, a reminder that no matter what I built, she could destroy it whenever she pleased. And the costs, lumber isn't cheap. Paint isn't cheap. Weekends aren't cheap. Yet there I was, again and again, pouring money and sweat into rebuilding something she'd destroy days later. All while the HOA sent me fine after fine for unrepaired damage. It was like I was living in a bad skit written by a sadist. But something was changing inside me. Every time I bent down to pick up a splinter, every time I hammered a fresh board into place, every time I watched her SUV tear through like I didn't exist, I felt it building. Not just anger. Resolve. I started keeping records, photos, dates, times, a journal of every incident, not because I thought the HOA would care, I knew they wouldn't, but because I knew one day I'd need evidence, receipts. And every time Karen laughed, every time she waved, I told myself the same thing. She's building her own downfall, one shortcut at a time. Because people like her, people who think they're untouchable, never expect consequences. They think their titles protect them. Their noise drowns out everyone else. Their arrogance blinds them. But all it takes is one well-placed strike, one carefully laid trap. And as I stood in my yard, hammer in hand, sweat stinging my eyes, boards scattered at my feet for what felt like the 10th time, I made myself a promise. The next time Karen tried to plow through my fence, she wouldn't be laughing. She'd be learning. It's funny how something as simple as a fence can eat away at you. Day by day, splinter by splinter, that white line of boards became less a boundary and more a reminder. A reminder that I was losing money, losing dignity, losing respect. Every morning I'd step outside with a mug of coffee, hoping for peace only to find wreckage. Boards scattered across the grass, tire ruts carving through the dirt. Max would nose around the debris, tail low, ears pinned back, as if even he knew we were living under siege. The worst part wasn't the destruction, it was the silence. Silence from the board who ignored my complaints. Silence from the neighbors who whispered behind my back but wouldn't dare confront Karen. Silence from the city clerk who brushed me off with a shrug. It's a civil matter, sir. A civil matter. As if watching a grown woman weaponize her SUV against my property week after week was no different than a squabble over flower beds. Meanwhile, Karen strutted around like she was queen of the cul-de-sac. At HOA meetings, she scolded people for leaving trash cans visible or planting flowers not in the approved shade of pink. And everyone bowed their heads, too scared to challenge her. But when it came to me, she saved her sharpest claws. I'll never forget one Saturday afternoon. I was out repairing the fence yet again, sweat dripping into my eyes when her Range Rover slowed in front of my yard. The window rolled down, sunglasses perched on her face like armor. "Mark," she called, voice sickly sweet. "You really should rebuild this whole thing. It's dragging down the neighborhood." I wiped my forehead with the back of my arm, glaring at her through the haze of heat. Maybe if people stopped driving through it, it wouldn't look so bad. She smirked. "Accidents happen." Then, twisting the knife deeper, she added, "But it's your responsibility to maintain your property. HOA rules are rules, after all." The engine roared. The SUV rolled away. I stood there gripping the hammer so tightly I thought I might snap the handle. The humiliation burned worse than the sun on my back. It wasn't just my property she was tearing apart. It was my dignity, my standing, and the whispers from neighbors, pitying looks, little jokes, told me everyone saw it. I was the fool on the block, the man who couldn't defend his own yard. But the moment that broke me came on a Sunday afternoon. My sister had come by with her husband. My father, too, moving slower these days, his hands a little shaky but still smiling. We set up the grill in the backyard, burgers sizzling, kids laughing in the distance, a pitcher of iced tea sweating on the table. For once, I felt like maybe I could forget. Then I heard it. That engine, that familiar growl. Before I could even stand, boards exploded. Wood snapped like gunfire. Karen's Range Rover burst through the fence, barreling across the lawn. It missed the porch by maybe 3 feet. My father had been sitting there, a glass of tea in his hand. The drink hit the ground, liquid splashing across his shoes as his face drained pale. His hands trembled violently. For a split second, I thought he was going to collapse right there. Karen didn't even stop. She didn't check if anyone was hurt. She just roared down the street, her laughter echoing behind her like nails dragged across metal. That was it. I looked at the shattered boards, the spilled tea soaking into the dirt, my father's chest heaving as my sister wrapped her arm around him, whispering to calm him down. My jaw locked so hard it ached. It wasn't just about a fence anymore. It wasn't about me. It was about safety. That night I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. My thoughts were sharp, my chest heavy with rage. But beneath the fury, something colder was forming. Determination. See, people like Karen expect you to lose your temper. They want it. They want you to shout, to snap, to do something reckless they can use against you. That's their game. But what they never expect is patience, quiet strategy. So I waited. And I planned. At first it was just fantasies, reinforcing the fence with spikes, digging trenches, planting thorns. I scribbled ideas on napkins in the margins of my journal. But the more I thought about it, the more it stopped feeling like a fantasy. Because there had to be a legal way, a way to defend my property without giving her any ammunition. So I started digging through the bylaws. Night after night, I pored over that HOA handbook, flipping through city codes, scouring property ordinances online. Dry words, legal jargon, but I was hunting for something, anything. And then I found it. Buried in the fine print of the HOA rules was a clause. Simple, clear. Homeowners had full rights to reinforce and maintain their fences so long as the external appearance matched community standards. That was it. A loophole. It meant I could build the strongest, most indestructible fence imaginable. Reinforce it with whatever material I wanted. As long as the outside looked like a standard white wooden fence, the HOA couldn't say a word. The humiliation, the anger, the helplessness, they all evaporated in that moment. In their place came something I hadn't felt in months. Control. I closed the handbook and leaned back, a slow smile spreading across my face. Because I knew then this wasn't over, not by a long shot. No, this was just the beginning. The night I found that clause in the HOA bylaws, I didn't sleep. I couldn't. My mind buzzed like live wires. Reinforce the fence however I wanted, as long as the outside looked the same. It was practically an engraved invitation. Karen thought she had me cornered with her smirks and her bored influence. She thought the rules bent only for her, but paper doesn't lie. Those words were written down, stamped, binding. For the first time in months, I felt lighter. No more hammering flimsy pine boards every weekend. No more apologizing for damage I didn't cause. No more sitting quietly while my neighbors whispered about my weakness. No, now the fence was going to evolve. The very next morning, I pulled out a notepad and started making lists, not just shopping lists, battle plans. I needed steel, heavy-duty steel posts, the kind they use for highway barriers. I'd sink them so deep into the ground that not even an earthquake could shake them. Then I'd sheath them with pine boards, paint them white, and from the street it would look like the same old fence. To the HOA compliant, to Karen's Range Rover a death sentence. I called a buddy from college who'd worked in construction, told him I was fixing up the fence. He didn't need to know more. He gave me advice on materials, which concrete mix set fastest, which bolts held strongest. I wrote it all down like scripture. By the time the weekend came, I had what looked less like a repair kit and more like a military supply drop. 8 10-foot steel posts, bags of quick-dry concrete, pressure-treated pine, heavy-duty screws, fresh paint, and my favorite touch, rose bushes. Thick, thorny, mean ones. They'd make the fence prettier, sure. HOA-friendly landscaping, they'd call it. But anyone crashing through would also walk away shredded. Step 1 was secrecy. Karen had eyes everywhere. Neighbors who reported back to her about curtain colors, about Christmas lights, about grass length. If she caught even a whiff of my plan, she'd try to shut it down. So I worked at night. When the cul-de-sac fell quiet, Porch lights clicked off, and the hum of televisions faded behind curtains. That's when I began. I switched off my own lights, pulled a work lamp into the yard, and let the crickets mask the scrape of shovels. Max lay near the porch, ears pricked, my loyal sentry. Any time headlights flickered at the end of the street, he gave a low growl, and I froze, heart hammering, waiting until the car passed. I must looked guilty as hell out there, sweat running down my neck, dirt caked on my arms, working under moonlight like some fugitive digging a grave. But every shovelful of earth felt like progress. The holes had to be deep, 4 feet each, wide enough to swallow a small tree. My back ached, blisters bloomed across my palms, but I didn't stop. I poured in the concrete, set the posts, and checked them with a level. They stood straight, tall, immovable, like sentinels waiting for battle. Next came the disguise, pine boards measured to match the spacing of the rest of the fence. Fresh paint brushed on until the steel skeleton vanished behind whitewashed wood. From the street, it was indistinguishable, just another compliant fence. Finally, the roses. I planted them in clusters, weaving their vines through the slats, training them to crawl up the posts. Their blooms caught the moonlight, red as spilled wine. Beauty and brutality side by side. By the time dawn crept across the rooftops, I was covered in dirt, clothes ruined, body sore. But I stood there looking at my work, and for the first time in months, I felt something powerful. Prepared. And I didn't stop there. 2 small security cameras hidden among the roses and bushes, one aimed at the fence, the other covering the street. Both wired discreetly, ready to catch the moment she tried again. This time I'd have more than words, I'd have evidence, cold, undeniable legal evidence. During the day, I played it cool, fixed up other sections of the fence so it looked like I was just patching the old boards, waved casually to neighbors, even nodded politely at Karen when our paths crossed. But inside, I burned with anticipation, because she had no idea. Every time she slowed her SUV in front of my yard, sunglasses glinting, smirk painted across her lips, I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from grinning. She thought she was mocking me. She thought she was reminding me who was in charge. But beneath that fresh coat of white paint, she was staring at her own downfall. And I let myself savor it. Every time I walked past that stretch of fence, I pictured it. The crunch of metal folding, the hiss of a ruptured radiator, the shock on her face when her shortcut betrayed her. I didn't know when it would happen, but I knew it would. Her arrogance wouldn't let her stop. And when she finally did it again, when she aimed that Range Rover like a weapon, she'd find that this time the target wasn't me. It was her. There's a certain charge in the air when you're waiting for something inevitable. Like standing outside before a thunderstorm, the pressure humming in your chest, the sky holding its breath. That's how I felt every morning when I stepped out to grab the paper. That's how I felt every night when I turned off the porch light and listened to the quiet. I didn't know when it was coming, but I could feel it in my bones. And I was ready. It happened on a Saturday afternoon. The kind of day where the sun hung heavy, where neighbors mowed lawns and kids chalked their driveways. The cul-de-sac felt ordinary, peaceful, but inside I wasn't calm, I was waiting. I sat on the porch with a coffee mug in hand, pretending to read the newspaper. But my eyes weren't on the page. They were locked on the garage across the street. The moment came with a low rumble. Karen's garage door creaked open and out rolled the black Range Rover. Shiny as ever, chrome gleaming like armor, it looked invincible, a beast. Karen sat behind the wheel, lips pressed in that permanent scowl, oversized sunglasses hiding her eyes, her hair perfectly coiffed. She didn't glance my way. She didn't need to. In her mind, she owned this neighborhood. She could drive wherever she wanted. The engine revved once, twice, like a bull pawing the ground before a charge. And then she did what she always did. She turned her wheel, aimed directly at that section of fence, and hit the gas. The sound, I'll never forget it. Not the weak snap of wood, not the groan of nails giving way. No, this time it was a metallic clang, deep and final, steel grinding against steel. The Range Rover jolted violently, nose crumpling like paper. The hood folded. Airbags exploded with a muffled white smoke filling the cabin. Karen's sunglasses flew off. Her shriek split the air. The roses did their part too. Thorns raked across the paint, carving jagged scars into the glossy black finish. Branches snapped, scattering petals through the air like cruel confetti. And for once, it wasn't my fence lying in ruins. It was her car. Neighbors came rushing out of their houses, drawn by the noise. Doors slammed. Curtains twitched. Phones lifted into the air, already recording. This wasn't just an accident, this was theater, and the audience wanted every second of it. I rose from my chair slowly, heart pounding in my chest, and walked down the porch steps. I didn't hurry, I savored every step. There she was, stumbling out of the driver's seat, hair wild, blouse smeared with airbag dust. Scratches ran up her arms where the roses had reached in to claim their prize. Her face burned crimson with fury and humiliation. She pointed at me, finger trembling like a spear. "What the hell did you do?" I raised my eyebrows, fighting the grin tugging at my lips. My voice calm, steady. "Me, looks like you finally underestimated a fence." The laughter started small, then grew. Not the hushed, guilty chuckles I'd heard before. Real, unrestrained laughter. Neighbors doubled over, clutching their stomachs. Kids pointed. Phones zoomed in. After months of her strutting around untouchable, the queen had been dethroned in broad daylight. Karen stomped to the fence, kicking at it with her heel, expecting it to crumble like always. It didn't budge. The steel rang out beneath her shoe, and the sound only made her look more ridiculous. "You set me up," she spat. "You booby-trapped this." I shrugged, crossing my arms. "I reinforced my fence, perfectly legal, want to see the paperwork." For the first time, doubt flickered in her eyes. The crowd thickened. The Range Rover's front end looked like it had gone 12 rounds with a wrecking ball. Fluids dripped onto the pavement, forming a dark puddle beneath the chassis. The roses swayed gently, their petals bright red, as if celebrating. Karen, desperate to salvage control, turned to the neighbors, her voice shrill. "He's dangerous. He set a trap to hurt me." The laughter that followed nearly shook the street. An older man from down the block called out, "Booby trap? Lady, you drove straight through his yard. What you expect, a welcome mat." The neighbors roared. Phones caught every second. And Karen, the woman who once silenced a room with a glare, stood there gasping like a fish out of water. She sputtered threats about lawsuits, HOA violations, conspiracies, but no one was buying it. Her car sat mangled, her pride in pieces, and the whole neighborhood knew the truth. I leaned casually against the fence, crossing my arms. My voice carried just enough for everyone to hear. "Guess the shortcut's closed." The street erupted again. Karen's face turned scarlet. She stormed back to a wrecked SUV, muttering curses under her breath. But no matter what she said, no matter how she spun it, the damage was done. The queen had fallen. And for the first time in months, I felt the weight lift off my shoulders. Satisfaction surged through me, sharp and sweet, because I hadn't thrown a punch. I hadn't broken a single rule. All I'd done was give my fence a backbone. And Karen had driven headfirst into her own punishment. If there's one thing an HOA tyrant can't stand, it's not just being defeated. It's being laughed at. And in that moment, a Range Rover leaking fluids onto the street, neighbors howling with laughter, me leaning smugly against a fence that refused to budge, Karen wasn't just beaten. She was humiliated. Her face twisted as if she'd bitten into something rotten. She jabbed her finger at me again, screaming, "This is an outrage. He turned his fence into a death trap. He's endangering the whole neighborhood." The crowd wasn't buying it. If anything, their chuckles grew louder. Someone whispered, "Death trap? Lady, it's a fence." Phones caught every word. But Karen wasn't one to retreat. She yanked out her phone and barked into it like she was ordering backup. Within minutes, a familiar figure came striding down the sidewalk. Richard Langley, the HOA president. Richard always looked like he'd been pressed that morning. Khaki slacks without a wrinkle, a pale polo tucked just right, clipboard tucked under his arm as if it had been grafted there at birth. Normally he walked with calm authority, like the neighborhood's sheriff. But as he approached the mess in front of my yard, I saw sweat glistening at his temples. Karen rushed to him, clutching his arm dramatically. "Richard, thank God you're here. This lunatic booby-trapped his fence. Look what he did to my car. You have to find him, expel him, something." Richard blinked at the wreck. The mangled Range Rover, the pristine fence. Then he looked at me, arms folded, leaning against the boards like I was posing for a victory portrait. "Mark," he said carefully, "what exactly happened here?" I straightened, polite as ever. "What happened is simple. Karen drove through my property again, except this time the fence stood its ground, and before you ask, yes, I have the paperwork." From under my arm, I pulled the folder I'd been keeping ready for weeks. Permits, receipts, even a copy of the HOA's own bylaws with the relevant clause highlighted in neon yellow. I handed it over without a word. Richard flipped through, frown deepening with every page. Karen shrieked, "Don't listen to him. He built this on purpose to sabotage me. This is entrapment." I almost laughed out loud at that word. Entrapment. Like she was some undercover sting victim instead of a woman who'd been joyriding through my property for months. "No one forced you to aim 2 tons of SUV at my yard, Karen," I said calmly. "That was all you." The neighbors chuckled again, phones raised higher. Someone muttered, "She's really losing it." Karen spun on them, eyes wild. "Shut up, all of you, this is harassment." But the more she screamed, the less power her voice carried. For once, the neighborhood wasn't afraid. They were entertained. Richard finally raised his hand, voice sharp. "Enough." Silence settled, even Karen froze. He adjusted his glasses, glancing from the mangled SUV to the highlighted bylaws in his hand. Then, with a sigh, he said, "Mark is correct. Homeowners are allowed to reinforce fences as long as the external appearance is maintained." He hesitated, then added, "And Karen, if you've been driving through his property, that's trespassing, a violation in itself." You could heard a pin drop. Then murmurs, neighbors whispering, smirking, nodding. A tide shifting right before my eyes. Karen's jaw dropped. "You're taking his side after everything I've done for this community." From the back of the crowd, someone called, "Yeah, like fining us for Christmas lights." Laughter rippled through the street. Another voice added, "Or threatening us over garbage cans." The crowd erupted. Karen's head snapped back and forth, desperate for allies, but her power was crumbling. Even the board members who usually orbited her like satellites stood uncomfortably, unwilling to be dragged down with her. She stomped her foot like a child candy. "This isn't over, you'll regret this, all of you." But the authority had drained from her voice. I leaned closer, dropping my tone so only she could hear. "Funny thing about fences, Karen, sometimes they keep people out, sometimes they keep people in. Either way, this one just trapped you." Her lips trembled, she had no comeback. Neighbors clapped me on the back as Richard walked away with my paperwork, whispered congratulations. About time someone stood up to her. Well played, Mark. For the first time, I wasn't the man with the broken fence. I was the man who had turned the tables. But deep down, I knew one thing. Karen wasn't going to lick her wounds quietly. She wasn't built that way. This wasn't the end. No, this was the start of the real fight. By Monday morning, the wreck wasn't just sitting in Karen's driveway. It was sitting in everyone's phones. You couldn't walk past the coffee shop without hearing it, snippets of laughter of the crash. "Did you see the way the roses shredded her paint? She really thought she could beat a fence." Clips bounced from group chats to Facebook, even Tick. Someone had even set the video to dramatic opera music, the crash timed perfectly with a cymbal crash. I laughed so hard I nearly spilled my coffee when I saw that one. Karen, of course, was furious. She stormed around the neighborhood with her chin high, barking at anyone who so much as chuckled when she passed. But the harder she raged, the weaker she looked. The image of her stumbling out of that SUV, blouse smeared with airbag dust and scratches across her arms, was burned into everyone's memory. By midweek, the insurance adjuster came. Short man in a crisp suit, clipboard in hand, circling the mangled Range Rover that still sat in her driveway like a monument to her arrogance. I watched from my porch, mug in hand, trying not to look too obvious. Karen gestured wildly at my fence. He did this. He built it like a trap. You have to mark it as vandalism so I can file my claim. The adjuster raised an eyebrow. Vandalism, ma'am? With respect, it looks like you drove your vehicle into a reinforced fence. Karen's voice cracked. He tricked me, he built it to cause damage. The adjuster crouched, running a hand along the bent undercarriage. He sighed, straightening. Ma'am, your policy doesn't cover intentional trespass, and from what I hear, this isn't the first time you've done this. I nearly spit out my coffee. Neighbors had been waiting for this moment, and they didn't hold back. Mrs. from across the street wandered over, waving her arms as she recounted all the times she'd seen Karen cut across my property. Mr. chimed in about how his kids had to stop playing in my yard because Karen's SUV was a hazard. One after another, testimonies piled up. It wasn't just gossip anymore, it was evidence. And Karen knew it. At the next HOA meeting, she tried to claw back control. She marched in, dressed like she was about to host a press conference, binder slamming onto the table. This man is a menace, she declared, pointing at me. He deliberately sabotaged his fence. He's a danger to the community. I didn't raise my voice, didn't even flinch. I slid the folder across the table again, receipts, bylaws, and just for fun, a USB stick with security camera footage. Everything I did was legal, I said calmly. And here's proof of exactly what happened. Karen drove through my property, again. The murmurs around the room grew. Neighbors nodded, some smirking. Richard, the HOA president, cleared his throat. Karen, based on the evidence, it appears Mark acted within his rights. Furthermore, repeated trespassing is itself a violation. Karen's jaw dropped. You're taking his side after everything I've done for this community. From the back, someone piped up. Yeah, like fining us for leaving holiday lights up. Laughter rippled through the room. Another voice added, or writing us up for garbage cans. For the first time in years, people weren't afraid to laugh at her. Karen slammed her binder shut, face crimson. This is harassment, she screamed, but her voice cracked under the weight of it. The queen wasn't commanding anymore, she was flailing. And then came the cherry on top. The HOA secretary read a letter from Karen's insurance company. Her claim had been due to negligent and repeated trespass. Worse, her account was flagged for potential fraud because she'd initially reported it as vandalism. The look on her face was priceless. I leaned back in my chair, arms crossed, and let the silence stretch before saying, funny how rules work when you actually follow them. The room erupted again. Karen sputtered, tried to rally, but her power was gone. Board members shifted uncomfortably, no longer willing to back her. Her allies smelled blood, and no one wanted to sink with her ship. By the end of the meeting, Richard closed his folder. This board will not pursue action against Mark. In fact, Karen will need to review your conduct further. Her cheeks burned crimson. She hissed at me under her breath, something about regret and lawsuits, before storming out, heels clicking furiously against the floor. The queen was finished. But here's the thing about people like Karen. Humiliation doesn't humble them, it fuels them. After the crash, after the insurance debacle, after the HOA turned on her, she walked around the neighborhood like a volcano about to blow. Her smug confidence was gone, replaced by a frantic energy. She snapped at kids riding bikes, barked at delivery drivers for parking too long, scolded neighbors for trash bins. But the fear was gone. People smirked now, they whispered, they pulled out their phones when she walked by. And with every sideways glance, every chuckle, I could see her unraveling. It finally boiled over on a hot Thursday afternoon. I was out front watering the lawn, enjoying the quiet hum of the hose when I heard it, the growl of her SUV. She pulled up fast, tires squealing, stopping right in front of my yard. She climbed out, sunglasses crooked, face red as fire. "This is your fault," she screeched, pointing at me like she was handing down judgment. I set down the hose, eyebrows raised. "Karen, you've been saying that for weeks. Might be time to come up with some new material." Her hands shook, her lips trembled, and then she snapped. In one swift motion, she stormed to my mailbox. The heavy, government-issued one cemented into the ground and ripped it clean out. Concrete base and all. For a second, time froze. Dirt crumbled from the bottom as she hoisted it like some twisted trophy, chest heaving, hair flying. Gasps erupted from across the street. Curtains twitched. Phones appeared instantly, recording. Mrs. shouted from her porch, "That's a federal offense, you lunatic." And in that instant, I knew Karen had just gone too far. The moment Karen ripped my mailbox out of the ground, the neighborhood went still. Not quiet still, like the world itself held its breath. The concrete base crumbled in her hands, dirt falling onto the pavement. Her chest heaved, her eyes wild, hair stuck to her forehead in sweaty strands. She looked less like the polished HOA queen and more like someone who'd finally snapped under the weight of her own ego. Phones were already up, recording, catching every angle. The collective gasp had barely faded when Mrs. shouted from her porch, "That's a federal offense, you lunatic." Karen froze for half a beat, as if even she realized what she'd just done. Then she dropped the mailbox onto the street with a loud clang, pointed at me and screamed, "This is your fault." I didn't say a word. I didn't need to, because the flashing red and blue lights were already painting the cul-de-sac. A patrol car rolled up, tires crunching on the asphalt. Another one followed close behind. The neighborhood kids gawked, eyes wide. Adults whispered in clusters, phones still recording. For once, nobody was afraid of Karen. They wanted the world to see. The first officer stepped out, tall, broad-shouldered, calm. He glanced at the mangled mailbox lying in the street, then at Karen, then at the cluster of neighbors filming like it was a premiere. "Ma'am," he said evenly, "did you just damage this man's mailbox?" Karen snapped her head toward him, indignant. "Do you know who I am? I'm on the HOA board. This man is a menace. He tricked me, he humiliated me, and now you're here harassing me." The officer didn't flinch. He just walked over, bent down, and examined the shattered concrete at the mailbox's base. Then he straightened, expression flat. "Ma'am, tampering with or destroying a mailbox is a federal offense. You'll need to come with us." The words landed like a hammer. Karen's jaw dropped. Her hands flew up in disbelief. "What? No, you can't do this to me. I am the HOA. I make the rules." A ripple of laughter passed through the crowd. The officer's partner stepped forward, pulling out cuffs. "Ma'am, please turn around." Karen shrieked, backing away, hands flailing. "This is harassment. This is a setup. You're all conspiring against me." But it didn't matter. The officers moved with practiced calm. One took her by the arm, the other snapped the cuffs over her wrists. The click echoed down the street, final and sharp. She kicked, screamed, tried to pull free, but she wasn't the queen anymore. She was just a woman in handcuffs, red-faced and defeated, while the neighborhood she used to rule stood united and amused. Phones recorded as they guided her to the back of the cruiser. Her voice grew shrill, words dissolving into incoherent shrieks. She banged her shoulder against the car frame, shouting promises of lawsuits, of revenge, of regret. But nobody flinched. Nobody feared her anymore. As the door shut, her voice cut off. The car pulled away slowly, taillights glowing red as it turned the corner and vanished from sight. Silence lingered. Then it broke, not with whispers this time, not with pity, with applause. Scattered at first, then stronger. Neighbors clapped, whistled, cheered. Someone shouted, "Finally!" Another yelled, "About time!" I just stood there watching the spot where the cruiser had disappeared. Max pressed against my leg, tail wagging. For the first time in what felt like forever, the weight on my chest lifted. Richard, the HOA president, approached me quietly. He looked tired, defeated, but not at me. At himself, at the board, at the whole sham they'd allowed to fester. He cleared his throat. "Mark, on behalf of the board, I owe you an apology." I didn't answer right away, just looked him in the eye. Finally, I nodded. "Just make sure it never happens again to anyone." He nodded once, slowly. "It won't." The neighbors drifted back to their homes, still buzzing with conversation, laughter echoing faintly as doors shut and curtains swayed. The videos I knew would spread. Karen's reign was finished. Not by my hand, not by revenge, but by her own arrogance. As the sun dipped low and the cicadas hummed, I walked back to my porch, sat down, and looked at my fence. Strong, straight, untouched. For once it stood tall, not as a symbol of failure, but of resolve. I thought about the long nights digging holes, sweating in the dirt. About the laughter that had burned like salt in old wounds. About my father's pale face when the SUV nearly struck him. About the countless times I'd been humiliated, mocked, ignored. And I thought about how sometimes patience is sharper than anger. Sometimes the strongest weapon you can wield is restraint. Karen had been her own downfall. All I did was hold my ground. I reached down, scratching Max behind the ears as he leaned into my hand. The sky burned orange, the air cooling with evening, and for the first time in months I felt peace. Because dignity doesn't always look like pride. Sometimes it looks like silence. Sometimes it looks like patience. And sometimes it looks like a fence standing tall while the world finally sees the truth. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe and join us for the next mystery on HOA Hunter Stories.